Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey, this is the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you are a returning subscriber, hey friend, hope you're having a great day. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts. You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So you got to hit that subscribe button and join us as we change the world. I am here with the man, Steve Koslow from Allianz, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. How you doing, my friend?
Doing great, thank you.
So we're just coming off of a long weekend. This is our second attempt at this. Our first time we had some technical difficulties, and we're not pointing fingers. Hopefully you're not pointing them at me, but we are back and we're ready to dive deep. So anyways, Steve, what I really like about you, you have this really cool background, this really cool path into ethics and compliance. And you're doing a lot of really cool things inside your company and outside of it, which I hope to touch on. But before that, let's just kind of start talking about your path into ethics and compliance. I always think that that's such a great and exciting, I don't know, I'm just always fascinated by people's path into this game because like we always say, so many of us are sort of slipping off the log and falling into the ethics and compliance pool.
And in many ways, that's a pretty apt description. I had a fairly eclectic career coming into this. I was a teacher for many years. Then from teaching, I went to law school, was practicing law, and part of my career was with MetLife. And when I was with MetLife in their law department, that was the beginning of sort of the compliance world was starting to emerge. This was in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And like many folks of my vintage, we started in the law department, we started as lawyers, and began practicing law. And then from MetLife, I went to PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I was a consultant working with a number of companies, helping them with compliance programs. And then from there, went to directly into a compliance program as their chief compliance officer, both in Madison, Wisconsin, and then here in Minneapolis with different companies. So it's been a roundabout way of doing it.
Yeah, and you're in a very kind of highly regulated industry. And what I found is that, those are the ships that sort of rise first when the tide moves, and so it sounds like you've really been at the front end of, well, let me back up. I think we were maybe talking about this in our show flow or at another point before. I'm kind of new to the ethics and compliance game. I haven't even been in this game for a decade at this point. I love it, but it seems like there is this swell, this big inflection point coming is what it seems like. And it seems like there's all this change about to come, and all this change that's happening now is just kind of foretelling what I think the next 5 to 10 years are going to look like. As you look back across your time, even going back to the late 90s when you really started kind of, stepping into the pool, so to speak. I mean, there was a ton of change at that time. So, I mean, has the rate of change changed, or has it just always just been constant and kind of at this type of a pace?
I think there's been a rise, plateau, rise, plateau, rise, plateau. When I started in compliance back in the mid to late 90s, it was a very technical and tactical type of an organization. So at MetLife, for example, we were focused on advertising review. We were focused on complaint handling. We were focused on some of the very technical regulations that were coming to the forefront by the state regulators, primarily in a highly regulated area like insurance. And so the regulators became very interested in how we were selling, whether we were protecting consumers. And so they began to develop a number of expectations that were very technical in nature. So my career started out focusing on those technical requirements. It evolved, though, in probably the early 2000s to much more of a risk-based approach. In other words, rather than trying to be compliant with a technical regulation, what was the risk you're trying to manage? And taking a viewpoint of looking at the risk portfolio and asking whether or not the controls were commensurate with the risk. So take, for example, the anti-money laundering world. The anti-money laundering world changed pretty dramatically, obviously, after 2001. And it became much more of a principle-based approach. So the controls that were right for one company may not be right for another company, but they were asking us to look at what was the risk we were trying to manage And then were our controls effective for that risk? That was a pretty dramatic shift in how we viewed, at least how I viewed, managing compliance. And then the culture side of it started to come into the forefront much more directly. As I was working with companies as part of PricewaterhouseCoopers, the idea of first and second line began to emerge, and the idea that the culture in the first line was so tremendously important was where we began to focus. And so you could have all the best controls in the world, but if you didn't have the right culture, it really wasn't meaningful. And so getting back to your point, there were rises, plateaus, rises and plateaus. And it's very interesting to think about where the next rise is going to come from. And I would submit that the next rise is really being driven by analytics and the metrics that we have around compliance, so that you can begin to more effectively and dramatically detect whether or not you're managing the risk effectively. So think about you've got three sides to a triangle. You have prevention, you have detection, and you have response. We spent a long time on prevention with training programs, with rules, regulations, and all of this. We focused on detection, but not as dramatically as I think we can. And I think that's where you're going to begin seeing the rise of metrics, if that helps.
So let's dive into that. There's a lot. I love graphics, triangles with words on the side. I think they sum up. I mean, it's such an easy way to hold on to sort of concepts. Mm-hmm. So walk me through that again. Pretend I'm an idiot. Don't, you don't have to try that hard.
Well, you're certainly not, but let's.
All right, but just kind of explain this to me like I'm 5. My mom is listening to this podcast and she doesn't even understand this stuff. Explain it to me that way.
In the compliance world, the first thing we want to do is we want to prevent bad things from happening. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that employees, that we are complying with regulatory requirements and expectations, that we are complying with consumer expectations. Mm-hmm. So we want to prevent bad stuff from happening. And we do that by having very good policies and procedures, by having training in place, by having, automating to the extent that we can, okay, so that we reduce. But that's on the prevention side. Then you have the detection side. No matter how good we are at prevention, stuff's going to happen. And some stuff, not intentionally, but just, we don't know, for example, whether a product is designed effectively, that people are going to understand the products that we are putting out there. So we have to look at, whether it's complaints, whether there's all different kinds of metrics we can look at to say, oh, wait a second, we've got an issue. So let's go back and either retrain, redesign, put new policies in place, automate, whatever. But it's that detection side of the triangle that I find most fascinating, because the more we can get into the metrics that are mm-hmm. indicators of a problem, the quicker we can detect an issue, and then we can respond effectively. In other words, it's one thing to detect something, but then you have to do something about it.
Yeah, it's sort of a flywheel, right? You have this prevention
exactly.
side of the triangle. The detection will give you some indication on the extent to which these preventative measures or these tools mm-hmm. that drive prevention are effective. And then obviously you have to do something about that data. So we've had data this whole time, right? How have we fallen short? How has, I come from a finance background, so I'm not, I like data. I like spreadsheets. I like analysis. That's kind of what my previous life was sort of totally built on. And I've been a little bit surprised, frankly, by sort of the general aversion that a lot of people seem to have to this, this, what I would just call like it's another tool. It's another fruit, or it's another Absolutely. Tree in the orchard that you can pull some fruit from to nurture yourself and drive, better results. What do you think that's rooted in, and how have you seen folks get kind of lost in these data lakes, as I call them?
Yeah, there were two challenges that we had to overcome, two pretty significant challenges. One was that most of the data was in disparate systems in most companies. That occurred, as the companies grew, they built new systems. The systems didn't necessarily talk to each other. And so trying to get to that proverbial data lake, as you call it, was more complicated than people realize. And you just couldn't get to the data in a way that was reliable and meaningful. Mm-hmm. The second challenge was you start out first and foremost by asking questions. That's the easy way to look at data is say, how many, let's take something in my world, which is insurance, and we look for early surrenders. So I want to know whether or not somebody is surrendering a policy sooner than they're getting the value out of it. So we can look at early surrenders, and I can ask the question, do I have a trend line in early surrenders in certain populations? So I'm driving the pull from the data. The more interesting way to look at it is to let the data tell you what question you should be asking. And we're just beginning to scratch the surface on that. And that's where we're starting to utilize our data scientists. And we're saying, okay, you've got all this data. Tell me what question I should be asking. Okay. And that we're just in our infancy at. And, perfect example of that is with fraud, where we can be asking a question, can I detect whether or not somebody is moving money out of a policy sooner than we would expect? That is a potential fraudulent situation going on, and we can investigate. But I can also start looking at what's the data telling us about how 70, 80-year-olds are managing their money. And am I starting to see trends with that? And what would an outlier of that trend be? So what would the outlier be? And that's the flag. So going at it both from the question into the data and then from the data telling us what questions we should be asking.
Yeah, it's kind of flips it on its head a little bit. And I think it's easy to get inundated by the data or get in, for a medium-sized company that maybe doesn't have a whole data scientist department that they can pull from, I see a lot of these folks get kind of lost in it, and they're looking for, the stock reports that come out of any one of their, to your point, separate systems to give them the answer. But kind of, again, to your point, there are probably unique stories in whatever data you're looking at. And it all totally comes down to the scientific sort of method that you take in trying to falsify your hypothesis. But again, the whole kind of crux there is asking that right question and forming that right hypothesis to see if you can nullify it or not. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. And, having the right data and the right analytics is only the first step of it. The whole area around visualization and being able to communicate a risk situation to senior leadership so that they very quickly can understand how much risk are we holding on to, and is our risk world changing? And that's all visualization, and that even the smallest company can do, because you have the data, you have the information. How are you communicating that effectively? And that's really where we started. We started with visualization.
Well, that's a great point. And I think a lot of these concepts, I love talking to folks like you who are at the top of these really large organizations that are extremely complex, because many times you guys are at the cutting edge. You guys are at the forefront of the innovations that are happening that are going to cascade back across the rest of the industry. And sometimes I think, our average listener who's maybe at a sort of a smaller or more mid-size, or even a Fortune 1000 company, who's not really at that top echelon, they might look at that as oh man, they have it all. And man, one day it'd be great to have all those resources. But I think the big takeaway is to recognize that the fundamental approaches to the problem can be sort of gathered from any of you innovators and applied to whatever you have to work with. And, I live and die by the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. If you can get 80% of it right, if you can ask, the 20% of the right questions to get 80% of that result, you're going to be leaps and bounds and orders of magnitude ahead of where you otherwise would be. So there's so much to pull from what you're talking about, irrespective of whether you have a data scientist, who just analyzes data all day long. You probably have an auditor analysis. You probably have an accountant working, across the Zoom meeting from you that you can get some insights on how to analyze this quicker in Excel or whatever. But the point is, to use you as an example, you're solving for outcome. Everything we're talking about right now is you solving for outcome and recognizing that we have to push this forward. We have to be able to visualize risk better. We have to be able to convey that to leadership better, not only for our own selfish interest to show our worth at a greater degree, but to show our worth to those around us in terms of meaningfully managing the risks of our organization. So many times I just think so much of this stuff seems so far away, but it's really right there. We can start to put some semblance of that into practice.
And it is a little bit of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trying, seeing if it works, finding out it doesn't, trying something else, seeing if it works, it doesn't, trying something else. It's a continuous journey forward. And if I look back, some of our very early forays into this were, not very good. And sure. I'd take a picture to somebody and I'd say, what do you see from this graph? And they would tell me what they see from it. And I'd say, well, that's not at all what I wanted to share with you. So I go back to the drawing board, and that's okay.
Well, that's natural. That's the natural path of innovation. That's the natural path of continuous improvements. It's a plan, do, check, act. Plan, do, check, act.
Exactly.
And you make little bets, and you don't go all in on every single hand that you're dealt. You make little bets, and you see like, okay, is this kind of indicating, is this kind of showing what I expect it to show? And to your point, are other people, am I not getting lost in the data and just seeing what I wanted to see? Is someone else going to kind of come to that same conclusion? And that's how we can make sort of bigger bets over time. And so I think you and I are kind of cut from the same cloth in many respects, in terms of, I think, how we see this game and where we see it moving. I'd like to kind of go back into your maybe even before your PwC days. You said that you were a teacher. What were you teaching, and what caused you to take that leap into law school?
That's really an interesting question. I taught 5th and 6th grade. 3 of those years I taught in Wisconsin. 6 of those years, my wife and I lived in Saudi Arabia, and I taught school for the Arabian American Oil Company, which was a fascinating experience. And I just realized, I love teaching, but I wanted to do something different, and that's why I went to law school. I actually started out thinking I was going to become a lobbyist, and ended up going a whole different direction when I was in law school. And, my career has been very, it just moves in different directions. I've always followed people rather than, the positions or pay or things of that sort. And I happened to be working for people that opened up different worlds to me. And I've always found that fascinating. So when I was at a law firm, I happened to be doing a case for MetLife and got to know some people at MetLife when they had a need for some lawyers that could do
being recorded.
Okay, we're back.
Yeah, you connected with some people that they had some need for some lawyers who could do compliance.
Right, and so then that got me from doing labor law, which is what I was doing in law, from law school and early in my legal career, to doing compliance work. And then from compliance work, I follow interesting questions. I follow interesting people. And that's what sort of allowed me to flourish in my career and enjoy it. I'm having, a great time doing what I do.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I was going to kind of bring that up. You seem like a guy who's really in his Q zone. You're really doing what you're meant to be doing. You seem like you're, energetic, and you're excited about what you're doing. And I find it interesting that you said that. I've never, we've done 100-something episodes of this, and I've never heard someone say that. I follow interesting questions. And I love the picture of that you're following people and you're following interesting questions, and you're sort of almost like trusting how the world works. You're trusting sort of the process that it's going to take care of itself. Where did that belief come from? Because most people would not have not said that to me. Most people do not sort of, they're not willing to, pardon the sort of analogy, to just follow the winds of fate in such an easy way, to just set the sail up and just kind of let it take them where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, there is the balance of I had 4 kids and I had to make sure I had a paycheck coming in and all of the rest. So there is the reality that always takes place. But I'm sort of a myopic optimist. I have a real belief that the world is a good place, that the people I work with are good people, and it's always proved out to be very beneficial for me. I don't think it was ever done by design. And there certainly have been hiccups in my career where I've had some challenges where I've said, nope, this is not the right place. And so I've moved on. But at the end of the day, I've always enjoyed what I was doing, and I think that's been sort of the secret to what has kept me going. I'm a lot older than people think I am, and I have no intention of retiring. I'm going to keep going until my mind stops getting interested in things.
I love that. My dad always said, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. And he said it to me my whole childhood. And I don't think I ever really understood it, or I feel like I'm just finally starting to understand it, that you have to be fascinated by what you're doing. You have to think that you're doing something that's meaningful. If you're just by rote pulling a lever on a machine and you don't actually love doing this all day, then you need to figure out something else to do, because we all have these gifts to put to work, or we're going to get chewed up and spit out by this this machine we're all in. I find it a little, I love your energy. I love your angle. I want to dive into one thing, that, you were a teacher, and teachers always seem to be people that want to give back. They're fascinated in, kind of helping the next generation. Then you went to law school, and it sounded like you wanted to become a lobbyist. And then it sounded like you pivoted toward labor law, which again seems to be very others focused. Am I right? Am I right so far on this?
Right. It is. Yeah.
And so
right.
How has that sort of others focus, that others focusedness, that you seem to be built on, helped you both in your career trajectory in terms of your internal persuasion, and also as your role as a compliance officer in a massive, highly complex international organization?
I think I learned early on that our success is almost entirely dependent on other people and how we interact with them, and the value we derive from what they can give to us, and you get that by giving to them. It's hard to put into words, but I've always been very blessed. I've just been incredibly fortunate to work with people that are really good people, and they're caring people, and it brings out the best in me. I always feel very fortunate that the times I've worked with, the times that have been the most challenging have been the times when we've achieved the most with people. And my responsibility is to always surround myself with people who care. I have a very little tolerance for people who are arrogant. That's, we talk about what we don't like. I will not tolerate arrogance, because we are so infinitesimally small in the big picture, that, it's humbling when you think about it. And so everything we get, we should be very thankful for. And I don't want to get into the whole metaphysical kind of thing, but I do feel that the role of compliance is one of giving. It is a role where we have an opportunity to help move the dial on a culture. And, as you well know, Nick, it's, if you have your culture right, the compliance takes care of itself. And our responsibility and our privilege, if you will, is to help move that culture, and to do it in a way that allows the companies, the best in a company, to come out. And being able to see that slowly evolve over time it's been fascinating and a lot of fun.
Yeah, how cool. I don't know, it seems like, well, you tell me, I feel like you've kind of been here to see so much of this game and how it's evolved from, this one level to the next level and on to the next level. that transition from risk-based approach to sort of culture forward seems like a very interesting one. Many times it seems like innovations are very apparent. It's like sliced bread. It was just bread that's been sliced. It's not like that big of it. It's like the bread was already there. You just needed a knife to bring to it. Like the culture is already there. The opportunity for that to reinforce the overall, sort of quality of compliance of the organization was right there to just turn on. How have you been able to affect that at scale? Because I think a lot of folks who, let's say you're at a 5,000 person organization that's just domestic, that has 3 different plants or 3 different offices or something like that. Many times, I talk to folks and they feel overwhelmed by that. They feel overwhelmed, like, well, how can I turn this seems like a battleship. And your organization is orders of magnitude larger than that, international, all that kind of stuff. And yet you speak about the opportunity to sort of turn these people on and kind of affect this culture at scale. Talk to me about what that's like and where you see people like lose their footing in that game.
Probably one of the biggest lessons I learned early on was to focus on the wars, not the battles.
Wow.
That you want to change a culture, you change it from a collaborative us mentality. And you don't do that through power. You do that through influence, persuasion, and over time, credibility. So, I see too many, in my career, too early in my career, I needed to be right. And I needed to fight battles that, I could win the battle just because of the number of stripes on my shoulder, but it wasn't moving the culture forward. It wasn't doing anything. It was winning a battle, but it did nothing for the broader culture. And so when I finally realized that, stop worrying about the battles, think about the big picture and how are you going to move the picture? Do you have people that are aligned in their view? Do you trust that they have good intent? If somebody has good intent, then they're going to make missteps, but that's okay. Now you're just trying to nudge them in a certain direction. Pretty soon, you get enough people moving in the right direction, and all of a sudden the whole thing starts to move.
Right.
And that's a much more powerful, long-lasting, has a long-lasting impact than using your power to be right and to win a specific battle. Now, that, just to be perfectly clear, I will never allow, even on a small battle, for us to be out of compliance with a regulation. Right. That is clear. 99% of the decisions that we make in a company have nothing to do with being in or out of compliance. It has to do with how much risk we're willing to accept. And that is, those are discussions. And I am not one to say that I don't live in a zero risk tolerance world. I don't like that world. We live in, right. Risk is all around us. And so, those were just important values that I learned all early on from folks.
I love that line. Win the war, don't worry about winning the battles. I mean, we can get so caught up in that.
Yep.
I guess though, at some level, it's like, it goes back to that materiality question, right? Like, what matters and what doesn't matter? Which of these battles do you want to die on, and which of these hills do you want to die on?
Right.
You've met exactly these people, right. And I was probably this way too at some point, but like, you just want to die on every hill because, well, if I die on every hill, then at least I'm not going to not die on the hill that I needed to die on. Well, it's like, you need to have a little bit of like wisdom on figuring out which you're going to kind of engage in. How do people get that wisdom quicker? Is it just, you have to be a consultant, or you have to be humble, or I mean, how do you get there quicker other than just like life experience?
I think humility is a huge one. Recognizing that you don't have all the answers, or pretty much any of the answers. You work with the whole team to get the right answers. That we are in a long. We take a larger view of things. I could be working with a sales producer, somebody who's trying to sell something, and their wording may not be exactly the way I would have worded it, but they're not doing anything dramatically wrong.
Right.
And so why should I try to make it perfect in my view? It may be perfect in theirs. You know, it's really interesting. One of the best lessons I had was early on when I started at MetLife. I was working with a field force, and one of the senior leaders of a region took me out for 2 weeks out in the field so I could actually sit at kitchen tables with sales agents and
Wow.
watch how they communicated with consumers. And you begin to realize how incredibly hard it is. What they do is important, and that they all want their customers to understand what they're selling.
Right. Yeah, they're not trying to hoodwink anybody.
No,
Right.
really not. So anyway, it's interesting.
But so often, so often I've seen, even in our company, there's this territorialism that comes up, or what I call this otherism comes up, and these people get it. You know, our group gets it, but that other group doesn't get it. Marketing doesn't get it, but sales gets it, or support doesn't get it, but ops gets it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. And I mean, if that's happening in a company that's a fraction of the size of your company, or if that's something that I have to fight against there, I mean, how does that not erupt? I just see so many folks kind of fall into that caricature of believing that like everybody else in the company is a bad actor except for the ethics department. You know what I'm saying? It's crazy.
Yeah, and every company I've worked in has those challenges and those silos, and every company works against them. I think what has been working well here is sort of having one vision and one voice. In other words, we are one company.
Yeah.
And we try to align around why do we exist? I mean, how many companies have mission statements and have values and they don't really listen to them? I will tell you, one of the things that impressed me before I even came to Allianz, and Allianz Life in particular, our values meant something, and they are talked about constantly. And at meetings, when you have disagreements, you go back to the values.
Love it.
Does this pursue caring, excellence, integrity? I mean, it grounds what we do, and it crosses the boundaries of operational silos. And it gives you a chance to continually ask, what should we do? And most decisions are not right versus wrong. Most decisions are right versus right. And you have right versus right dilemmas. So how do you choose those? You have to anchor them back in the values. And it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's meaningful.
Well, your culture is just what? A culture is just the sum total of the decisions people make, how they feel, how they act out every single day. It's just the sum total of the behaviors of a bunch of individuals who decide, frankly, to come to a certain place and work every day, right? So how do you corporately, how does the ethics department kind of guide those things forward? How does the C-suite guide those things forward? Well, it's like we're kind of climbing this mountain, and to your point, there's 1,000 ways up the mountain. Well, what's going to kind of direct our path one way or the other? It's those values, or it's going to be kind of whatever. And what I find is most companies are kind of like, well, it's kind of whatever. We obviously need, because we're a company, we need a values page. We need to have some values, and those, we need to have something that like we point to each quarter when we put out our press release, or, we have a quarterly meeting. But I think the companies that really sort of like animate their values, or really animate their culture and really breathe life into it, to your point, are the ones who are constantly talking about it. You're constantly singing that song. And then now there's a harmony that you hear people humming. And now there's a guidebook essentially on how to make your decisions that, again, are maybe right versus right, but the confluence of those decisions consistently are going to really, provide these sort of, reinforcements of what that culture is supposed to be. And that's what allows you to kind of manage risk at scale. I think that's really that sort of culture being a reinforcement for, or, something you said earlier, which I wrote down, which I'm going to get wrong, but like, if you get the culture right, you're automatically going to get the compliance right. It was something like that. That's how that can really happen. Yeah.
And it really points to the critical role of leaders in an organization, because it's up to leadership to ensure that the values conversations occur,
Right.
and that discussions and debates and disagreements get anchored back in those values. And that's, I mean, I've been very, very fortunate to work for some phenomenal CEOs who truly walk the talk when it comes to values. I mean, and it's absolutely critical.
Isn't it silly though? Isn't it silly? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Isn't it silly that it's something that's so simple? Again, maybe it's the sliced bread thing, but like you can spend all this time coming up with the values, and it can it's kind of like a binary thing. It's either going to like be an amazing tool for your organization, both in terms of the employee experience and ultimately the client experience and how compliant you are and all those kinds of things, or it's just going to totally fall flat and you're going to be kind of swimming upstream. And like all you have to actually do is just talk about them all the time. You just have to, make it a rule to say, I'm going to start every meeting talking about it. Or if I'm promoting somebody, I'm going to tie it down to a value. Or if I'm firing somebody, I'm going to tie it down to a value, and I'm going to share with the whole company why that value violation mattered so much. Like, it's not really that tough in a way.
It shouldn't be. But it's hard on a day-to-day basis when you're worrying about the details of decisions that are being made, to continually think, to bring it back to that. It's interesting.
You're right. Good point.
One of the things we're thinking about now is what are the actual behaviors of integrity? In other words, what would be the behaviors that would manifest a culture of integrity? And we're looking at it from the standpoint of a culture of accountability. So in other words, if an employee is accountable, they will have a higher probability of manifesting integrity. And by accountability, we're talking about, are they honest? Are they transparent? Do they demonstrate courage? Do they own their decisions?
Right.
And we're trying to really work hard at looking at the actual behaviors that we believe will drive the value of integrity. And we're still in the beginning stages of working through that, but I'd like to get it down to behaviors. And then how do I promote those behaviors?
Yeah, and how do you hire those behaviors? Where do you think that sounds super fascinating. Where do you think that's going to go? Like, if you were to project forward, what do you think that this whole thing is going to look like?
I actually am very hopeful on it, because I think that one of the challenges most employees have is they don't feel as empowered as leadership would like them to feel. And when we empower employees and they know that they're empowered, and they know that honesty is valued, they will be more transparent in their trials, if you will. In other words, why don't you get entrepreneurship? Because entrepreneurship implies that you're going to sometimes fail. Well, okay, that's okay, but we have to allow that, and they have to support that. And if employees understand that, then they'll start to own their thinking, their decisions. They'll be more transparent in the problems they're having and realize that it's okay. And so they'll try to do things that may be hard.
Right.
And that will be what I'm hoping accelerates growth.
It's a pretty fascinating connection I hadn't really made before. That's actually really insightful. Inherent to entrepreneurship is, the word is in there, right? Like, you feel empowered as an entrepreneur because you feel like you have the power to succeed, and that you may fail. And you're not going to get fired from entrepreneurship. In its sort of purest form. Unless you kind of crap out. But so many people in our organizations, they can't tap into that entrepreneurial, whatever.
The spirit.
That spirit, yeah. They can't tap into it because there's so much fear. There's a fear that their voice doesn't matter. There's a fear of failure. There's a fear that they're gonna, get in trouble, or that whatever they say isn't going to be acted upon. And it's totally the antithesis of like the entrepreneurial experience, where like you own everything. It's just your agency, and you can try these different things, and you can experiment, but like you have an ownership of the thing and the outcome. And I think many times we don't see, I'm kind of like nerding out on what you're saying, but many times we don't see this potential this spark that we think exists in everybody in our organization, because they're scared to take ownership of it because they don't feel like it's theirs, or they don't want to get jaded again. They don't want to raise their hand and say, hey, that's, I don't feel like that fits into the, the code of conduct, or that really nice video I saw about our values, and then they're called a snitch or whatever, right? Like that breaks people's spirit. So like, we wonder why we don't see their ownership. We wonder why we don't have all these human sensors in our organization. And like, at some level, we're not like creating the circumstances for that to sort of like blossom forward,
Right. It's hard, and
Totally.
it comes in fits and starts,
Yeah.
and all it takes is one failure for somebody to be jaded. And it takes a long time to build the trust, the psychological safety, the spirit, but it can be broken so quickly.
Yeah.
And but we, as long as we keep heading in the right direction, I remain very hopeful of that's what's going to differentiate Allianz Life from our competitors.
Well, I guess if I was zooming out of everything we're talking about, what we're really talking about is authentically engaging and creating a culture of integrity, that people step into your organization and they feel different, and they feel like their voice matters, and they feel empowered, and they feel like they can make it their own. And you and I both know that there's 1,000 positive externalities that come from that. People don't want to leave those kind of companies. People are willing to work just a little bit extra for those kinds of companies. They're willing to raise their hand if something isn't going right. Like, there's so many positive benefits from it. And I think, when we were talking about like, what is this next phase, and maybe me and you are going to say this from different angles when you were talking about the data analytics part of it, because I think that's absolutely going to be a foundation of what I'm about to say. But I feel like the companies that really separate from their peers are going to be the ones that kind of get this thing right, that get this employee engagement thing right, that understand that their external brand and their internal brand, which is really the employee experience, are the same thing. The values on that wall between what you show externally and what you live out internally it's the same wall, it's the same membrane. And recognize that there's so much opportunity if we don't just pay this lip service. So many companies are just like, they just pay lip service to this. Okay. At some point there was no values. At some point there was no internet, but like at some point, companies' values wasn't like a big trend. Now every company has it. Well, I think we're going to see a lot of companies kind of try to pay lip service to this thing, but those that authentically engage in it, like you seem to be doing, and like your company seems to be doing, are just going to separate at such a speed and such a velocity from everybody else. People are going to be left kind of scratching their heads.
I could not have stated that better. You're absolutely right. And that's the foundation of what is driving us today at Allianz Life, is the employee engagement, the culture, the belief that we actually walk the talk when it comes to our values. Those will be far more important than any technical decision we make on a day-to-day basis, because it'll drive the big picture. And it's very exciting. And I think that will become a differentiator of companies, is whether or not their culture is authentic or whether their culture is not.
Totally.
And, it's something that doesn't just happen in the abstract. It happens by purpose. Leadership has to be very purposeful about it.
You're not just going to wander to the top of a mountain. You're not going to just wander to the top of the podium at the Olympics and get a gold medal. You're not just going to wander into a great culture. There's going to be a purposeful visualization. There's going to be consistent effort in a similar direction. It's not always going to be perfect, of course, but it's going to be consistent and it's going to be purposeful. And let me ask you this. Have you been as excited about the game that we're in as you are right now? Has it gone up and down over time? Because you seem like you seem like me. You seem like my kind of guy. Like, it seems like it's all coming right now.
I've always been pretty energized. I'll tell you. When I was at PwC, my team used to tell me to stop drinking so much coffee. I was a pretty high energy person. I liked whiteboards. I liked ideas, and I liked surrounding myself with people who have ideas. I think one of the advantages I have now is I have the support of a tremendous company, and my leaders, everybody. There's a lot of support, and it gives me the freedom to really do what I want to do, which is,
Yeah.
it's not very often you have a chance to build something the way you want to build it and try it out and play with it and, take it out for a drive. It's exciting, but
And
I've always felt that way somewhat.
Yeah. I guess I imagine that that's true. When you said I can never see myself retiring, I was like, only people who are high energy, who just love what they're doing, could ever say, ever say something like that. There's like 3 different things I want to go into. I wish this episode was longer. I'd like to talk about this one though. You said, my career has had hiccups from time to time, and sometimes I've gone into a place and I said, you know what, this is not for me. What I find is that many people who maybe they don't know their purpose, or maybe they don't have the confidence in themselves or in the way the universe works or whatever, they end up getting stuck in those kinds of situations. They look back and they're like, oh my gosh, I've wasted so much time here. I don't see that happen, after having talked to you for this last hour. I don't see you kind of getting caught in that kind of a quicksand. And you referenced some of those other scenarios. What was it that allowed you to kind of hit that eject button quick? Or what did you smell in the air that said, you know what, I got to get out of here now? And what gave you the confidence to like do that and not get stuck somewhere?
Yeah, I do. I can remember times when it was very clear, the tea leaves were clear as to where an organization was going, whether it was the team that I was part of or the company. And I didn't feel that I was going to be supported, or I was directly not supported in what my view was going to be. And it was time to leave. It was time to move on. And I've been very fortunate that I have been able to move from one place to another when the time is right. And it doesn't mean that those places were wrong. It just wasn't right for me.
Totally.
And that's okay. You have to look at whether or not a specific situation is right for you at that point in time.
Right.
And
and frankly, it's on you to make sure that you are spending your time in the places that your gifts can be put to the best work or can make the biggest impact. I mean, that's on you to kind of grab that steering wheel. And I think that's good advice, I guess, to just, kind of trust your gut and be looking for those tea leaves, because many times the writing's right on the wall.
And always be open. Networks have always been very important to me. I will tell you, I network relentlessly in my world. It's a small little world of compliance officers of insurance companies.
Yeah.
But we all know each other, and having that network has been critically important during certain times of my life. I received the position I'm in right now was because I was on a board with a fellow who had this position before. And when he left, he suggested me. Amazing. And it was just, those networks are so critically important. Maintaining them.
My first undergraduate business class, this old businessman came up, and he was like a sage, he was like a magnate and just worth a bunch of money and did a bunch of great stuff in business. And he would just sit up there and he would pontificate. It was like the best class I ever took. So much wisdom. But the first class, he said, there's 2 things if you only learn 2 things from this class, learn these things. You always got to have a plan, and your network is your net worth. And I've never forgotten it. And it has been such phenomenal advice. And I see so many ethics and compliance folks not take advantage of this amazing community that we have. We have an amazing community of people that you can reach out across the aisle to, who are fighting the same battles that you're fighting, and or who are, they're inventing wheels that you're probably reinventing on your own. And we're all willing to share because we're all trying to fight for higher integrity companies. You know what I'm saying? It's such a unique thing that's not inherent to sales. It's not inherent to manufacturing. You think GM's, quality control guy is reaching out to Ford's quality control guy to say, hey, how do you get your tolerances better? They're not doing that. They're enemies. We're all fighting the same battle, and it's such a unique thing. And I just see so many folks not take advantage of that thing. Let's jump to this question. I always ask this question. Let's go back in our time machine, find a young Steve, and give him some advice you wish you got earlier. This could be you in grade school. This could be you in junior high or high school, or maybe right as you're coming out of law school. What advice do you wish you had that would have really allowed you to make an even bigger impact than you've made?
I guess if I were to put that into words, it would be to trust the world. I learned to trust the world over a long period of time. And I think early on in my career, I was, a little skeptical, little, unsure of myself, didn't have the confidence. I would just trust the world. Good people trying to do good things, and don't worry so much about trying to achieve something. Just enjoy. I don't know. I wish I didn't take myself so seriously back then. I wish I would have not taken myself so seriously.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Enjoy the ride a little bit instead of just being so focused on that destination. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great advice. So Steve, I know we're getting to the end of our time. I feel like this could have gone in literally another hour. There's so much other stuff I wanted to talk to you about. Where can people get in touch with you? Where can they find you, and maybe even call out your that organization you're on the board of as well?
Well, sure. You can easily reach me at steve.koslow@allianzlife.com. I'm on a couple of different boards of directors. There's definitely the Compliance and Ethics Forum for Life Insurance. I'm on that board. I'm also on the board of a community mental health area. But the easiest way to reach out, I'm also on LinkedIn, so anybody can look me up on LinkedIn and connect. And I'd love to hear, I'd love to connect with other compliance people all the time, because I learned so much from everybody I talk to. You're right, it is a community, and it's a great community.
It is. It's really special. And I don't think most people who have spent their whole lives or a significant part of their life in this industry can appreciate how special it actually is, because it really is. I've never seen anything like it. Okay. Thank you for joining us for the Ethics Experts. Until next time.